we'll go ahead and get started. I want to start by thanking you guys who have joined us today. This is the fourth and final part of our webinar series. We've had a good time going through different supply chain tracking technologies, talked a little bit about indoor positioning, and we're excited to wrap everything up here today with part 4, which is making sense of supply chain tracking technologies. I was joking a little bit earlier. Hopefully, I'm not recycling any jokes that you guys have already heard. It's been 4 parts, about an hour long each. So if you hear recycled jokes, please bear with me. But let's get started. So we'll do the same old that we've done for the last 3. Just a brief overview of the webinar. I'll introduce myself and our company. We'll go through what we've covered. In terms of future webinars, we don't have anything immediately planned, but we will talk a little bit about that. And then we will make sense of tracking technologies, what's out there, what you can use for your business. We will then have a Q&A session, and then we will close. So for those of you who may be new, who haven't been on one of these webinars before, I do have everybody muted. We are recording this so that we can post it on YouTube later and share it around. If you have questions for the Q&A session, hold on to them. We will conduct that through chat. So if you have something, just keep it in your back pocket. When we do the Q&A session, we will conduct our Q&A through chat. So if for some reason we don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to myself or Susan Timmons. We'd love to get in touch with you and make sure that all your questions get answered. So without further ado, we will introduce ourselves. So who are we? I'm Christian Garcia. I'm a product manager here at Apptricity. I work on our supply chain management software solutions. The 3 solutions include enterprise asset management, enterprise inventory management, and field service management. Each one of those solutions has both a web and mobile application that you can use. We've been in the business, Apptricity has been in the business of supply chain for over 20 years. We work in both the commercial and the government sectors. Some of our customers include Verizon, Brinks, and the U.S. Army. We work with the U.S. Air Force as well, and other branches of the U.S. government. So we've been in this business for a long time. We understand the technology. As technology has grown and advanced, we have started to integrate the latest in what's available. So we wanted to use this webinar series as a way to explain some concepts that may be a little bit difficult to understand on the surface, but also just share some of our expertise with you so that it can help you make a decision on how to best optimize your supply chain. I'm sure I've said this before, but it's nearly impossible to go more than 5 minutes without hearing about supply chain issues. I think the most recent one I heard is that there's a supply chain issue for sriracha. I went to the store the other day and there was nothing on the shelf. So I think that's the recent one. I think the one that just ended was the chicken wing shortage. So it seems like we're kind of going back and forth between different food products, but best wishes for sriracha. Hope it comes back soon. So reviewing our webinar series, this is the 4th and final session that we have planned. The other 3 sessions are available for download, or you can check them out on our Apptricity YouTube channel. We've been recently putting a lot of effort into that channel, uploading some shorts, uploading some segments from our new podcast, which we've started called Supply Change. I'm also the host of that. So if you're not tired of me after these 4 and you want to just get more, you can go to the podcast and listen to some other topics. Typically, we use our podcast as a method for more short form content. As we've done these webinars, it gives us a little bit of a chance to do a deeper dive into some of these topics. But really exciting stuff on the podcast. We encourage you to go check that out. But this is, like I said, the 4th and final webinar that we will be doing in this series. We'll talk a little bit about future webinars more towards the end. So with that in mind, let's get started. So tracking technologies, we're going to recap. This is really the content of our first webinar that we did over a month ago. And so there's really 5 main types of technology that you can use for tracking, right? We have barcodes. So an example that could be, regular 2D barcodes, there's 3D barcodes, QR codes, RFID. When we talk about RFID, we do specify on passive RFID. There is active RFID out there in the industry. It's not very widely used. So when we refer to RFID here at Apptricity, we are mostly speaking about passive RFID. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have Bluetooth beacon technology, we have LTE tags and satellite tags. So those are really the 5 technology types that we will be spending the majority of our time talking about today. And each of those tags can be used to track stuff, right? Your stuff can be assets, it can be inventory, it can be personnel, it can be just about anything you can put a tag on, right? There's no limitation to what you can track. So I want to start by just kind of reviewing the difference between a passive and an active tag, because this is a question that comes up frequently when we're dealing with different customers who are asking, okay, well, what's the right tag for me, right? And that's really going to be the main question that we're asking, or that we're asking and answering today, is what is the right tag for my use case, right? So we're going to go over a few of those, but we want to start by kind of differentiating between passive and active, right? So basically, passive tags require a scan for information transfer. So the simplest way to think about this is to look at a barcode, right? I scan a barcode, I get the information from that barcode, right? Same thing happens with passive RFID. I scan the tag, I get the information from the tag, right? When we start to move into active tags, we have active tags that will report on their own, but not all active tags have a direct internet connection. So there is some separation in the active tag classification, right? So Bluetooth beacons are an example of an active tag that do not have a direct internet connection. They have to be scanned by a device that does have an internet connection. So essentially that could be something like a fixed reader. In our vernacular at Electricity, we call it an eye controller, or a smartphone, tablet, really any sort of smart device with Bluetooth capability. And that basically, that essentially transfers the data from the tag to the device scanner, et cetera. And that device scanner has internet connection, so that it then relays that information to the cloud, right? And I use the cloud to really describe where your asset and inventory management solution is being hosted, right? It's typically in the cloud, right? When we move to active tags like LTE and satellite, those tags have a direct connection to the internet. Therefore, they can directly connect to the cloud to update information, right? So talk about passive versus active. Passive, you have to scan. Active, you don't always have to scan, right? Bluetooth is the active tag that you do have to scan. Bluetooth is actively beaconing out. It's actively sending out its signal, right? Whereas GPS LTE and satellite tags directly connect to the internet, so that they don't need that intermediary gateway to relay information. So that's the main difference between passive and active tags. So this is really the main question of today's session. How do I choose a tag type, right? I'm a business that understands the value of tracking technology. I understand how it can help what I'm trying to do. I understand that maybe I'm dealing with loss, I'm dealing with shrinkage, misplaced items, whatever the case may be, right? I understand the value of tracking technology, right? So how do we choose a tag? I've come up with really 4 questions that I think cover the scope of making that decision, right? So the first question, and arguably the most important question, what is the value of the item I'm tracking? Okay. Question 2, how frequently do I need information about this item? Question 3, what type of information do I need to know about this item? And then question 4, what are the characteristics of the environment where this tag will spend most of its time? So we're going to dig into each one of these questions, and hopefully it'll help paint a picture to determine what tag technology is best for your tracking scenario. So let's dive in. So question 1, what is the value of my item, right? This is what I believe to be the most important question that you have to answer about your tracking scenario, right? The value of the item should dictate the value of the tag that you put on it, right? I think it's a pretty simple concept, right? You wouldn't put a $200 tag on a $10 piece of equipment. It just doesn't make sense, right? And on the flip side, it wouldn't make sense to put a barcode on something that's worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you're not getting the level of information that you may need that is equivalent to the value of that item, right? So when we start talking about pricing, Active tags will often require a monthly device connection fee. Passive tags don't, right? So if we look at Bluetooth, LTE, and satellite, Bluetooth will typically have a device connection fee, just a monthly device connection fee. Whereas satellite and LTE, you're paying more of a typical data plan on the LTE side because those tags have a SIM chip, similar to the SIM chips we have in our phones that connect to the cellular towers, for data transfer through the internet, right? Satellite tags, same concept, but it's using the satellites orbiting the globe to transfer information. But each of those three active tags have a device connection fee, whether it's through an LTE cell chip, data plan, through a satellite data plan, or through just a Bluetooth connection, right? Passive tags don't, because with passive, there's really, you have to scan them, right? So you're only getting information as often as you're scanning a passive tag, right? So when we're talking about price, barcode and RFID, those tags are in the cent range, right? You can buy them for a couple of cents. When it comes to RFID, you can buy printers that will encode RFID tags. That costs a little bit more, but as you buy rolls of RFID tags and you get down to the price per unit, you're typically dealing in cent value, right? Barcodes, you can almost print for free, right? You can go download barcode generators and print free barcodes. It costs you as much as ink and paper does, right? But when we start getting into things like Bluetooth, LTE, satellite, right, we have a wider range, right? Because with Bluetooth on the lower end, tags can be anywhere from $10 to $20. We've seen them higher depending on the type of sensors that are located on the Bluetooth tag. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But then things like LTE and satellite, right? You pay for what you get, or you get what you pay for, rather. With satellite, you're paying for 24/7 monitoring that virtually will never fail, right? With LTE, you're paying for something a little less than that, right? You're paying for monitoring as long as there's cell coverage, and obviously as towers continue to go up and cell coverage becomes wider and more reliable, so do these LTE tags, right? They become a more reliable solution as the tower infrastructure grows. So those tags, can cost anywhere between, say $50, $60 to up to $200, depending on the type of tag that you're purchasing. So really the point that we're trying to make is that items that are more valuable often require more active tracking and monitoring. And the way that you get that is with active tags, right? So I'll go back to the example that I mentioned, right? If I had, a bulldozer or, something that was worth, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? A barcode is not really going to give me much value because I'm only going to get value out of that tag as often as I scan it. So every time I want to get information about it, I got to send somebody out there to go find it, scan it, right? Whereas when you start taking a look at an active solution like LTE or satellite, that's constantly reporting on its own. You don't have to go scan it. It's directly connecting to the internet, connecting to the cloud, and reporting its information. So something like a $200 tag on a $100,000 piece of equipment makes a lot more sense, because if you lose that piece of equipment, you're in deep trouble, right? It costs a lot to replace stuff like that. But that's really the spectrum that gets developed is, you on one side of the spectrum, you have high cost, but more reporting. And on the other end, you have low cost and low reporting. And so there's no right or wrong way to do this, is really the point that we're trying to make, is that you should let the value of your item determine the tag that you use. So that's question one. What's the value of my item? And question two is similar. We kind of already talked about it. How frequently do I need this information, right? This question helps make the decision between a passive tag and an active tag, right? So active tags, like we mentioned, with the exception of Bluetooth beacons, can be programmed to report on a user-defined frequency. They will automatically report to the cloud. Bluetooth beacons, they can be programmed to beacon at a defined frequency, but there still has to be something that's receiving that data, right? So there still needs to be that gateway between tag on one end and cloud on the other, right? So passive tags and Bluetooth beacons require a device to scan them and send scan data to the cloud, right? This only happens as often as tags are scanned. So when we start talking about integrating fixed readers, we talked about our at Electricity, we call them eye controllers, right? You can program eye controllers to scan its surroundings on a user-defined time frequency. It could be in seconds, it can be in minutes, it can be in hours, right? How often does this controller perform a scan? And so basically, when you start getting into use cases like inventory management, right? You're tracking the inventory quantities at a specific location. You can set up an eye controller to do a scan every 5 minutes, every minute, every hour, right? And so tags, passive tags, and Bluetooth tags are there to be on items that will ultimately have to be read by either a handheld scanner or a fixed reader, right? So you can send somebody with a handheld scanner as often or as infrequently as you like, and that's how real time your data is going to be. If you have a fixed reader, you can program that fixed reader to do a scan as often as you like, and that's as close to real time as you can get, right? Items that require real-time tracking visibility should utilize LTE and satellite tags. These are typically things that are out and about, right? We talked about a bulldozer or maybe like a power generator, something on a construction site that's expensive and it's in a huge area, right? It makes sense to have something that's actively reporting and on a time frequency that makes sense for your business, right? You may not need location updates every second, right? So when we talk about real time, right? Real time may not be as important for you. Near real time may be more important. You can have a tag that scans every minute, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every hour, right? It's for you to determine. And that's really the key takeaway from frequency of information. It's what your business needs. It's what you need in order to be successful. And in order to be, have peace of mind that, hey, the equipment that I'm responsible for managing, I know where it's at, right? So let's move on to question 3. What type of information? This really gets into the different types of sensors that are out there. So we talk a little bit about IoT sensor technology, right? So there are sensors out in the market that can be used to track things like temperature, light, humidity, shock, movement. There's more than just those that I mentioned, but those are kind of the key ones that we see a lot of. You can't see these in Bluetooth or RFID tags, with the caveat that, like I mentioned, there are RFID tags that scan for temperature, but those are active tags. And like I said, you typically don't see those as often, right? They do exist, but they're not as deployed and they're not as well fielded in the industry. So basically, when you start talking about sensor tags, you're looking at Bluetooth or LTE tags, right? And basically, these sensors get built into the actual chipset of the tag, and it's capturing information. So the simplest of this is probably temperature, right? I have a temperature tag. It's using its sensor to read the temperature of the surrounding area. That's part of the data that gets sent through the LTE connection, right? And so basically, the type of information that you need should also dictate the type of tag that you use, right? If you're doing cold chain tracking, or if you want to monitor driver behavior, right? There are, for those of you who are maybe familiar with, companies like Progressive and State Farm, they can give you a device that you plug into your car, and depending on how safe of a driver you are, right, you get discounts. I've never used that because I'm not that safe of a driver, if I'm being completely honest. I'm totally joking. I am a pretty good driver, but those tags are set up to where if you hard brake or hard accelerate or you turn hard, it basically records an event, right? Those are sensors. Those are sensors that are recording that. They're recording G forces of acceleration or harsh turning or harsh stopping, right? And then in the insurance example, they basically calculate all those events and basically give you a scorecard. Hey, you were a B- driver this month, so you don't get any savings, right? Now, the key thing to realize is that they really, really fine tune those so that, they're trying to make it to where you think you can safe drive, but the events are triggering on things that aren't really that big of a deal. So that's an aside. We won't go too deep into that. But anyway, sensor technology, it's sensing your surroundings. If you want sensors for your assets, inventory, whatever, you're typically looking at Bluetooth or LTE tags for that. Another sensor type is GPS, right? I almost forgot to mention that. That's probably the most common, right? And that's probably the one that we all understand. You get latitude, longitude coordinates from GPS tags. So, question 4. Oh, let's get back to my slides. Question 4, what is the environment? This is important in determining the type of like the hardiness of the tag. Like, can it withstand harsh conditions, right? So this question addresses environmental concerns or regulations. This is huge in the energy industry. So basically, a tag needs to be intrinsically safe in order to be used. And what that means is that they have to be able to operate around fuels and gases without the risk of static causing an ignition, right? So think about on an oil and gas site, right? Some of these tags that are active have batteries, and these tags need to be certified as intrinsically safe, so that if there is, for some reason, a spark or something that happens on the board of the chip, or the board of the tag rather, it's contained and it can't ignite any gases, right? Obviously, that would be a catastrophe if that were to happen. So that's what this is really referring to. But there's also IP ratings. I know Apple does this a lot in their iPhone promotion. Like, I think their iPhones are IP66 verified or 64. Basically, it means, is it waterproof? Is it dustproof? Right? Those are the two things. And so when you start looking at the environment that your tags are in, tags can be manufactured to conform to those regulations. They do vary in cost, right? Obviously, a tag that can be submerged underwater, at 6 feet for, an hour before breaking, that's going to be a more expensive tag than one that's not waterproofed at all, right? So this also goes back into really the value of your asset, right? If an asset is going to be in a harsh condition and it's expensive, you may want to shell out a little bit more money for the dustproof, waterproof tag. If you're tracking boxes in a warehouse, that may not be a problem, right? And so really the point that we're trying to make is that these questions help you determine the best technology, but you shouldn't have to feel pigeonholed into one technology, right? One of the value props that we have at Aptricity is that you can go with any of these tag types, and you're not, force feeding a solution into RFID or GPS or satellite, right? You can mix and match and choose and let the asset or the inventory item, what it is, how much it's worth, and where it's going to be. Let those questions determine the tag that you're going to end up ultimately using, right? So one of the other things that come up quite frequently when we work with our customers is, how do I move from one tag type to another, right? So I have a barcode solution, I have an RFID solution, I'm ready to move that into something else, right? The most frequent of these is going from something like barcode to RFID. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the differences and how RFID can, in a lot of ways, be better than barcode. The way that we do this at Aptricity is that items that you're tracking should have a unique ID that is separate from the tag ID, right? So what this allows you to do is you're uniquely identifying this asset, this inventory item, whatever the case may be, and you're associating a tag and all the scans that come from that tag with that item, right? So what that allows you to do then is, if you say you have an RFID tag or a Bluetooth tag that goes defunct, maybe it runs out of battery, or the RFID antenna gets scratched up and it doesn't work anymore, right? Instead of having to completely create a brand new asset or inventory item in the system, you're just replacing that tag ID with something else, right? Same concept goes for if you're moving from barcode to RFID or RFID to Bluetooth or whatever the case may be, right? You are just replacing the tag ID, the unique tag ID, with whatever that value is on the tag. So for like a Bluetooth tag, it would be the MAC address, right? For like an LTE tag, it's the IMEI. So there's all these different values that represent the actual tag itself, right? But the key thing that we like to tell our customers and the people that we work with is that if you have a barcode solution and you want to keep using it, you can have a barcode and a unique tag ID on an item, right? So basically, you're not having to choose between the two. If you have a barcode system that works and you like it, keep it. And if you want to toss RFID on top of it, you have the ability to do that in the electricity system. But really, when we start talking about transitioning between technologies, we just start looking at the different benefits of frequent data updates, right? Automated data updates instead of having to send the guy out, like I said, and go scan. And as frequently as you do that is as frequently as you get updates. Now these things are reporting automatically, right? Increased data that can be captured about the item. That goes back to our sensor technology, right? You're able to gather more information about the item you're tracking and its surroundings, and that can be very valuable. And then, like I already mentioned, automated tracking and location updates. So these are reasons why we see people move from one tag type to another. But once again, we really want to hammer home the point. You don't have to choose one solution. You can choose multiple, right? And you can make that decision based off of the value of what you're tracking. So let's go through some use cases. I think this is valuable insight. If you're looking to get started, maybe you've already started, but whatever the case may be, let's just go through some specific use cases. I think that will be helpful. So barcode. We're all familiar with barcode. It's been around for a long time. It's been around longer than I've been around, right? We know what it is. We would recommend using barcodes to track inexpensive items that really don't move around a lot, static items. You don't need real-time visibility on these items. Items that you're okay with having updates about them as frequently as you can send someone out to scan them, right? Perfect for low-cost bulk item tracking that you only need to update it on an ad hoc basis, right? So some examples of this: consumable inventory, things like boxes of inventory. You don't necessarily care about the individual piece, but more just the box of those things. Computer equipment, IT assets, things that don't move around a lot, right? At our office, we have, a mix between desktops and laptops, right? Things like desktops can probably have a barcode on them because they're not moving around a lot, right? If you want to know where it's at, you can scan it and say, it's here, right? If for some reason it's not there anymore, you just go scan it again and you say, okay, now it's here, right? That could be perfectly legitimate, a perfectly legitimate solution for an IT asset management system, right? But when we start looking at RFID, really what we like to preach about RFID is that it gives you pretty much the exact same thing as barcode, but allows you to scan multiple things at a time. If you haven't seen an RFID demonstration on how it works, I would highly encourage you to check one out. Maybe we'll do one on our YouTube, because I think if you recognize, or if you watch how RFID works and how efficient it is, and you basically are holding down the trigger of the scanner and you're basically waving it around, right? And you're picking up tags as you do that. You're picking up, tens, hundreds of tags in the span of a couple of seconds, right? You can't do that with barcode. You got to go and you got to scan this one. Then I got to scan this one. Then I got to scan this one, right? So you're also limited to line of sight. You got to find the barcode and then you got to scan it. Versus RFID, you have an RFID handheld that you hold in your hand, you hold down the trigger, spin it around in circles, do all the fun things you want to do, and you're basically picking up everything around you. So we like to say that this is really great for almost the exact same use case as barcode, but you can scan a lot quicker and you don't have to have line of sight, right? Now, there are natural impediments to RFID that we've talked about in our prior webinars. I think our first webinar, we went over this a little bit more in detail. So if you want more information on that, we encourage you to go there. I think we also have a podcast that covers that as well. So check that out if you want more information. But basically, the other part about RFID is that you have the handheld scanners, but you also have fixed readers that you can set up. So we talk about, tracking inventory in a room, or, tracking assets in a room, right? I can set up a fixed reader that we talked about. You can program to, conduct a scan every however many minutes, seconds, what have you. And now that's introducing that automated tracking, right? That automated data gathering. And so you can send somebody out with a handheld if you want, or if, again, you're tracking something like a warehouse or a storeroom where a lot of items are typically stored, you can just set up a controller and have that scan. And now that's being done automatically, right? You don't have to send that person. Some people still like to send people, that's for them to decide, but these are just options that you have. So for the examples, I have a lot of the same types of things, right? I started to introduce clothing into this. I know that one of our employees here at Electricity used to work at a Lululemon, and they track their clothing using RFID, right? You're starting to see it more frequently, especially with clothing items that are a little bit more expensive. It just gives you that ability to walk around. I know I've used this example multiple times, but I worked at an academy, right, a sporting goods store here in Texas, and doing inventory would have been so much easier if I could just go walk around and scan with a gun, as opposed to going to each box, scanning, and basically typing out how much I counted, right? So when we start to look at like clothing or like more bulk retail type items, RFID does become more of a beneficial tool to use, especially if you're interested in tracking at the each level. It's basically the individual item level, right? So that's really where we start to see RFID come into play. Bluetooth Low Energy, BLE. These tags are the first that introduce sensor technology and active reporting, right? So think about when you think about Bluetooth, think about, you draw a dot on a piece of paper and you draw a circle around the dot. That's how Bluetooth reports. Basically, it's sending out a beacon saying, come find me, right? Come find me. And so you can find it with a mobile handheld or a fixed reader with Bluetooth, right? So like I mentioned, at Electricity, we have our line of iConnect fixed readers. They're controllers that you set up at static locations. You can put RFID or Bluetooth antennas on them, and they'll just read the tags that are in the area, right? Obviously, if there's tags that are not recognized by the system, it trashes that data, but it basically gives you the ability to read everything in a location without it having to have direct access to the internet. So that controller has access to the internet that basically takes the tag data and sends it to the internet, right? So when we start to look at Bluetooth, and there's different versions of this, right? So at Electricity, we have kind of our standard range Bluetooth beacon, but when we start getting into long range and ultra long range, we're now starting to introduce miles into the read range category. So standard range, works maybe at around 100 feet. I'll need to double check my sources for that, but I've seen it work around 100 feet. When we get into long range and ultra long range, we're starting to look at miles. Ultra long range being in the 20-mile range. So if you start thinking about putting a GPS sensor in that tag, you now have what is essentially a cheaper replacement for an LTE tag, because you don't have to pay a data charge for that, right? A Bluetooth tag with a controller. Remember, we have to have a controller that's connected to the internet, because this tag is not connected to the internet, but it's built in with the GPS antenna, and a controller that reads it can now say, this tag has these GPS coordinates, and obviously this tag equals this asset, so I know that this asset is here, right? So we get into things like aviation equipment. Think about, I don't know, the last time you went on a business trip, or a trip for pleasure, whatever the case may be. You get on the plane, you see all the the carts and the things moving your luggage. That's a great solution for long range Bluetooth, because you're putting a tag on an aviation piece of equipment. It's moving around a lot. You've got one controller that's reading all the tags as they move, right? You're getting real time location information from that solution. Talk about designer handbags, right? Now we're starting to get into retail items that starts costing the hundreds of dollars, maybe even the thousands of dollars, right? These are the types of things that you maybe want a little bit more than just a barcode for, right? RFID may work in this sense, but you may also want Bluetooth, because Bluetooth is more powerful than RFID, because it is active, it is beaconing out, right? So you're getting more frequent and more reliable data from those types of tags, right? And then we have handheld scanners. We actually have, one of our customers is using that right now, but we're starting to see an interest in tracking the handheld scanners that people are using in a warehouse, right? And so Bluetooth is a great solution for that. And Bluetooth is what we use for our indoor positioning solution. So if you want to learn more about IPS, webinars 2 and 3 go deeper into detail on that solution. So we encourage you to check that out as well. But IPS does use Bluetooth tags as a tagging technology. So now we get into LTE/cellular. I say /cellular because we're starting to see more 5G tags out there as well. LTE, there were 3G tags as well. There were 2G tags, right? So basically, a lot of these tags will be, 5G with, LTE fallback, or 5G with 3G fallback, right? So basically, it has these fallback options to ensure that you're, as long as you have some sort of cell data coverage, these tags are reporting. But the purpose for these tags, they self-report. That's kind of the key difference. We talked about this earlier, right? Difference between passive and active. Active self-reports, right? With the exception of Bluetooth beacons. You have tags that can connect via OBD2. This is the insurance example that I gave. You connect them into your car, and they report and send information, right? The driver behavior metrics, right? Tags can be built with sensors. This is where we start getting deeper into sensor technology: light, temperature, shock, humidity, things of that nature. Instead of having to now scan that tag to gather that information is automatically being reported to your system, right? So when we start looking at LTE, we're starting to look at things like fleet vehicles, shipping containers, heavy construction equipment, power generators, things that are a little bit more expensive, right? Because with these tags, you're paying for the tag, and then you're paying for the monthly cell plan, right? And however frequently you want it to ping, you have to get a data plan that supports that. It's kind of going back to the old days of before unlimited data plans, right? Where you had 200 megabytes of cell data, and if you went over, you paid an overage fee, right? That still exists in the IoT world, right? So basically, you buy a data plan that supports the amount of pings that you want to do. That's essentially how that business model is structured. But as we talk about LTE and cellular, the only drawback to that is that you have to have cell coverage, obviously, right? There are still areas, you can get out into the wilderness, or the areas of the globe that are a little bit more remote, and you may not have cell coverage. And so that's where we get into satellite, because virtually satellite and LTE are the exact same, right? But satellite uses the satellites orbiting the globe to connect to the internet, right? So really where we see the purpose of satellite is global items, things that are traveling across the globe. They may be at sea, they may be in remote areas of the earth. As long as you have satellite coverage, which is basically everywhere, these tags are going to report. So we use examples like aircraft. We go back to heavy construction equipment. Maybe, again, you're in rural areas without cell coverage. These tags are great. Fleet vehicles, and then we start getting into personnel, right? This is pretty common. Personnel, people of interest, they have GPS tags on them to make sure that nothing goes wrong and that people know where they're at. So these are some of the use cases that we see in our, in our sales, in our marketing, and in the, the customers that we talk with, the prospective customers that we talk with. These are really the 5 use cases that tend to come up, right? And again, the key takeaway is that you do not have to feel pigeonholed into one solution, right? The Aptricity solution allows you to choose your tag type, any tag type, right? And like we said, you can have barcode and RFID, barcode and Bluetooth, barcode and LTE, right? Whatever combination you want. And you can track and manage your items, right? So instead of, having to put GPS tags on everything, even the less expensive stuff, we're putting barcode tags on everything, including the most expensive stuff. You can let the value of your items determine what you choose as a tracking technology. That's the key, because at the end of the day, the system has to work for you. It has to be financially relevant. It has to be budgetarily relevant for your company. And so having the ability to switch between those tags, start with maybe a barcode solution, work your way up into a different solution without having to change applications. These are the types of things that you need to be looking for in a solution, in a software application. So that concludes the bulk of this session. We're going to move into the Q&A. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask. I'm pulling up the chat. I'm going to take a quick drink of water, as I have done the last 3 times, to make sure that I'm good to go. But we will reserve kind of the last 15 minutes or so for any questions that you may have. So fire away. If for some reason we don't get to all of them, like I mentioned earlier, we will. I'm happy to address those with you one-on-one. So the chat is open, so fire away. Okay, question here from Mario. What was the distance of the ultra long range tag? I will get you specific information on it. It's greater than 20 miles. We've been doing some field testing with it, and I can't remember if it's 22 or 25 miles. 23. Okay, I was right in the middle. Thank you, Ben. We've been able to get reads from 23 miles. So it's pretty spectacular. Typically what I like to mention when we talk about ultra long range is that same power that you can use to go 23 miles, you can also use to penetrate buildings, right? So we've, another anecdotal example, we've been on the roof of our building, here in Irving, Texas, and we've been able to read the Bluetooth tag in the canal level, like the basement of the building. So that same power that, goes 23 miles, also goes through buildings. So there's value there as well. Okay, question here from Ben. Are there any use cases for GPS in smaller locations like stores or not huge construction sites? Smaller locations, one of the use cases that we've seen is like a car lot. If you want to know the location of vehicles on a sales lot for vehicles, that's a pretty common one because cars will move around. You want to know the location of cars. Really, GPS can be used just about anywhere that isn't indoors, right? We've talked about indoor positioning as kind of the solution for tracking things inside, but GPS can be used for anything outside, right? So that's basically the typical rule of thumb that we like to say is anything that's outdoors and it's moving around, you want to know where it's at, GPS is going to work for you. Once you start getting indoors, that's where things start to become less of a solution. And then we start to turn towards indoor positioning with Bluetooth. Okay, another question here. Are data plans for tags very expensive? Not really. I mean, obviously, when we've talked about this on previous webinars, but expensive is always a relative term based on your budget. But typically, you're looking at around $20 a month for data plans. If you need more data, you can go up. I'll need to get the most recent numbers from our partners. We obviously work with Verizon, so we not only like they don't have to pay their own data plans, right? Because obviously they're the ones who are sourcing the SIM chips. But we have a partnership with Verizon. We have a partnership with T-Mobile Sprint as well. So what we'll typically do is if you work with us, we will go through and try to negotiate what's the best data package we can get for you. And obviously, the more devices you deploy, the cheaper that gets. And then we also have basically metrics on if you want to ping this many times a month or, whatever the case may be, you're looking at this type of data plan to support that. So that's typically how we talk about pricing for data plans. It's reminiscent of the old days, right? Where you didn't have unlimited data, right? And you'd get texts from your, at least I'm almost 30 years old, right? So I'd get texts from my mom saying, "Oh, we went over our data plan again. Everybody send me money," and then nobody would do it. So it's kind of like those days, right? Or if you had kids, right? Your kids were going over on their data plans, and then you had to pay it. So, okay, let's do this one for our last question. You mentioned IPS is for indoor tracking. Would you use that for any other industries besides the typical warehouse setting? Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, I would encourage you to go check out our other webinars about IPS, specifically the third one, where we talk a little bit about key industries that can really utilize it. A warehouse setting is one of the best settings to use IPS, but you really can deploy it in any indoor setting, right? So that could be, a storefront. It can be, the back storage closet. It could be, you typically want it to be bigger than storage closet, actually, because it's not, you want something that's like, it's big enough to where knowing the position of an item is important, because not knowing it means you're walking around a long way looking for it, right? So really, IPS is great for any enclosed area. And again, I would direct you to our third webinar just to make sure you get the full picture of what that really looks like. All right, well, we will wrap up Q&A. If for some reason you thought of anything, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to answer your questions because we want your questions to be answered. This is all, we use this webinar series for you guys to kind of share some of the knowledge that we've gained, the expertise that we have. So in closing, we at Electricity want to thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate all the engagement that we've got, the comments, the questions, just really the interactions that we've had with our audience. We really appreciate that. We are going to be announcing a future webinar series in the next couple of weeks. We anticipate that probably taking place around September, October timeframe. I'm going to give my voice a couple months to rest. So not really, because I'm doing the podcast, but we'll be planning out our future webinars. So if you're interested, just you can follow us on our LinkedIn. We have social media around Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Pretty sure. I'm looking at you, Ben. Do we have all the Ben's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Okay, he's nodding his head. Okay, cool. So we do have all that. So you can follow our company updates there. As I mentioned before, all the webinars are available on YouTube. So if you want to go check these out, go check out our channel. Like I said earlier, we're really starting to promote a lot of content on that platform. So if you want to learn more about us and what we do, you can go check us out there. You can also visit our website to learn more. If you want to see any of these solutions in action, schedule a demo. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to show you practically what we can do for your business. Obviously, you come to a webinar, you hear me talk about it. It's one thing, right? Seeing it in action is a completely different thing. And so we're happy to schedule a demonstration to show you what it actually looks like in action, right? So we'd be happy to do that if you have interest there. Like I mentioned again, if you have any questions about the product, about the things we've talked about in the past 4 webinars, you can email me at cgarcia@aptricity.com with any questions that you have. I'd be happy to reach out to you. Again, I cannot stress this enough. We do this for our audience, right? We do this so that you can become aware of the ways that you can help your business by connecting your supply chain to the Internet of Things and by tracking and managing things like that. With that in mind, we will close up shop today. Thank you guys for joining. Be on the lookout for new webinars, and we will see you soon.